Thank you all for joining. Welcome to In Focus with Flashtalking. This is our quarterly webinar series, and today's topic is creative ad tech innovation. We've got a doozy for you. My name is Aaron Goldman. I lead marketing for Mediaocean and Flashtalking, and I'm broadcasting live from our Chicago office here. Let's have a look at our agenda. We'll start with our guest speaker, Nikhil Lai of Forrester. He's got a great presentation that synthesizes the recent Forrester Wave on creative ad tech, and he'll also share kind of more broadly the state of play in advertising creative and how the people process technologies around it are evolving. And then we'll have our marketer panel featuring some of the best and brightest minds in our industry, and best of all, they're Flashtalking clients. So we have Megan Holy from US Cellular, Jinx Jogliker from Dish Sling, EchoStar, / a lot of flashes in his company name, and Carly McLaughlin from Macy's. So it's going to be a great discussion. Nikhil will stick around for that too. So, and then at the very end, as always, I have some parting gifts for everyone in the form of QR codes and downloads. All right, so without further ado, let's bring up Nikhil. We can get him on camera here, and I'll set up a quick intro. For those that don't know, Nikhil Lai is a senior analyst at Forrester. His research focuses on the evolution of performance marketing, including creative, retail media, search, TV, audio, out of home, any other channel I might have missed. He's been at Forrester nearly 3 years, although I'm sure it feels like forever at this point. He's been in the middle of a number of important pieces of research. He most recently published the Wave on creative advertising technologies, so he'll get into some of that. And prior to Forrester, he was at Marpipe, Simul Media, and he started his career in the wild world of GE. So super thrilled to have him here today. And Nikhil, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Aaron, and to the broader Mediaocean team for hosting me. Great to be with you all, and thank you all for joining today. So as Aaron mentioned, I'm going to talk a bit about the creative process, how to apply technology to it, offer some frameworks that you can take back to think about creative ad tech and how to make it more effective, and then get into the details of the wave. So for too many brands that I speak to, this is what the process looks like. And this might resonate with some of you. It's a linear process with a bunch of discontinuous steps. It lags weeks or months, and big ideas are disconnected from creative testing, which is disconnected from media planning. And this is really a symptom of a lack of empathy between creative directors and performance marketers. And I hear literally daily from both sides of the equation. And the creatives say, you know, I'm skeptical about applying automation to a process in a way that will needlessly disrupt my workflows and more troublingly come at the expense of the craft of storytelling that I've been developing for decades. And the marketers say, you know, Nikhil, I really want this always on semi-autonomous machine that I can feed with modular inputs for constant testing. And so there's a cultural difference between the media and creative teams that I think gets expressed in this sort of process. But this is not what it has to look like. It can be a virtuous cycle that takes weeks, days, hours, in which big ideas are generated based on the results of the most recent creative tests and distinctive insights from the media planning team and customer insights team. Then those big ideas are rapidly developed into several variations. Those variations are tested significantly, and the results of those tests then scale winning media campaigns, lower CPA, higher conversion rates, and then the winning variables of those tests are constantly challenged to make sure that performance can fall over time. This requires a strong empathy between the two teams that I mentioned. It's not just a matter of integrating creative and media teams or integrating creative and media briefs. It's a matter of really having complementary goals so that the designers are hooked on media KPIs and the media planners are sympathetic to the creative process and the generation of big ideas. It's about testing rigorously, but not too rigorously. So as a best practice, I'm seeing brands back into a creative testing budget based on how many conversions they need per creative variable for statistical significance. But they're trying to test qualitatively different variables. So functional benefits versus emotional benefits, or model versus no model, rather than more minute variables that result in insights that are too granular to be generalizable and too granular to actually make a difference across the media mix. And this also requires identity, a strong foundation in identity resolution, being able to understand who your customers are, how they want to be addressed across the devices and formats and channels that they consume, and then being able to actually sequence and map creative exposures to those nonlinear customer journeys so that you simultaneously build brand and also stimulate direct response. So how do you do all this? You deploy technology. Specifically technology that spans creative workflows. So about 5 or 6 years ago, when I began covering this market, there was a cottage industry of vendors who were focused on exponentially increasing the amount of creative you have, a bunch of vendors who were focused on dynamic creative optimization and the benefits of deep personalization, a bunch of vendors focused on measuring creative and gleaning insights from creative tests that you could then feed back into media planning. And now there are vendors who do all three of those in one, and those are the vendors who are really the most impactful today. So spanning workflows, exercising what I call omni-channel prowess. So again, there were vendors 5, 6 years ago who just focused on reselling Facebook ads. Others were going really deep in premium video and TV. Others were focused on open web display. Now, given the fragmentation of consumption across channels, devices, and formats, you need vendors who are excellent across channels. And then third, I spoke a bit about identity. You need vendors who can help you understand clearly who your customers are and how they want to be addressed. We're seeing at Forrester a rising incidence of ad blockers, consumers clearing browsing histories, emptying cookie caches. They're fed up with audience targeting status quo. They're fed up with irrelevant creative. And so you need to better understand how they want to be addressed to bring them into market for what you're selling. And then also, of course, AI, but really distinctive applications of AI. So being able to predict what variables are going to perform within your next ad, that's powerful. Enabling you to have a conversation with the results of your own tests is also really powerful. So minimize the time to value, detect anomalies more quickly. There's a big brand that I was speaking to who is able to simulate their ideal customer and actually have a conversation with that ideal customer about, hey, emotional benefit A versus emotional benefit D. How would you respond differently to these two if we feature these in our next brand campaign? And they're doing focus group testing using the conversational capabilities of Gen AI. So those sorts of things are distinctive. They're not really toys anymore. They're now tools that make a big difference in how the creative looks and feels and performs. So technology can help. And as a result of applying technology, you get to this process that I call intelligent creativity. So this is, and so here on the right here, I mapped out Graham Wallace's creative process, which is nearly 100 years old at this point, which is still a very helpful heuristic that I know big brands and agencies bear in mind when they're designing their next campaign. But it's about applying algorithms to the preparatory work to predict what's going to perform and take risk out of spending money on creative and media that's going to disengage consumers. It's about applying intelligent software to the brainstorming process, minimize the time to value of brainstorming, come up with several ideas that can be quickly invalidated or validated. And it's about machine scale, so finding winning variables and being able to deploy those across channels, across formats, across devices is helped by creative ad tech, the fast you scale winning creative. the more effectively your media performs. So just to summarize before I get into the wave, the people that are involved in the process have to empathize with each other, shifting from task orientation to outcome orientation. I talked about integrated briefs, hooking the designers onto media KPIs and vice versa. The process should be tightly connected from big ideas to insights. There should be rigorous testing, but not excessively rigorous testing to validate or invalidate the efficacy of those big ideas, and modular creative that's conducive to quickly swapping variables depending on real-time signals that you're getting across channels and formats about what's working, all powered by an integrated creative ad tech stack that allows you to increase the volume of creative that you have to test so that you can create volatility in those tests and get to winning variables sooner, personalize based on a strong identity foundation so that you can map and sequence these creative exposures to consumers and address them as they want to be addressed, and then get insights from the creative and feed those insights back into the media planning process. The creative is literally a variable or a channel in your media mix model. It's a variable in your media planning tool, and then you can turn creative in this way into a new form of audience targeting, into a lever of brand and performance in a way that it really hasn't been before. So that's some strategy. Now let's get into the creative ad tech wave, which evaluates the leading providers in the market who are facilitating the strategy that I just laid out. It's an established market. The main trend that I see right now is the convergence of creative and media. And specifically what I mean by that is that creative ad tech is giving these two teams a common vocabulary and a source of truth in which to cross-pollinate best practices. And I really believe that tomorrow's performance marketers are going to be creative scientists, and designers have to be media experts. According to our most recent survey, we found that over half, specifically 53% of B2C marketing decision makers are going to integrate creative and media assignments in the next 12 months. So I'm seeing that happen. The big challenge is that the process is fraught with risk, right? So at any point in the process, people can be misaligned, technologies can be misaligned. You could have messy asset libraries, you could have off-brand templates, you could spend too much time and money on testing. You can have creative data that slips through the cracks between optimizations and the next concept and doesn't actually get applied. So there's a lot of risk in the process. The big disruptor is how Gen AI automates creativity, the extent to which it actually can automate creativity and be capable of originality. And the extent to which it can, again, minimize the time to value between trying to figure out what works and actually improving performance. So it's a mature market. Sorry, it's an established market. And then on the next few slides, we'll just go into specifically the characteristics of leading providers in this market, and then end up with the wave graphic, and then we'll go to the broader discussion. So, this market is booming right now because of data deprecations, rehabilitating the value exchange that's broken by iOS 14, broken by the threat of deprecating cookies, broken by clearing browsing histories and empty cookie caches. So this potentially rehabilitates that value exchange. The market was defined and confined by DCO. Now it's really transcended DCO to be omni-channel, omni-format platforms that span creative automation and intelligence. And as I mentioned, these platforms are consolidating point solutions for production and personalization and data. And these platforms are really going to be the leaders going forward. On the next few slides, I'll just characterize these leading providers. I mentioned that they have to span workflows. The benefit of this is that both the creative and media team get a source of truth that takes risk out of the creative production and the media planning processes, and builds that empathy between creative scientists and artful marketers, which is so crucial. Another characteristic, is that they not only bring the teams together, but you can actually, put creative as a variable into your media planning tool. As I mentioned, put creative into a media mix model, have media insights. I was speaking to um, an apparel brand who said that they were able to reduce their CPA on Meta by 50% or so, um, by figuring out that the pitch of the siren in the ads, in the video ads that they were running, um, made a big difference in performance. One pitch was more engaging than the other. The breed of dog was really engaging. The color of the chew toy was making a big difference in performance for them. And that was specifically on social, but I've heard similar stories across every other channel out there. And so that's what I really mean by connecting creative and media. And then they were actually able to, select different day parts, different days of week, different programs based on which ones they thought would be most conducive to, which ones they predicted would be most conducive to the creative that they're running, which I thought was, pretty groundbreaking. We talked about cross-channel credibility. It's important to span walled gardens and the open internet. There's still a lot of attention, I think, underpriced attention across the open internet that can be persuaded into market with really compelling creative. And it's not just across channels, it's also across the funnel, right? And so when you're running these big brand campaigns for which the KPI may be aided or unaided awareness, that shouldn't be exempt from the same kind of rigorous testing as your DR social campaigns. Or you can hold some of the top of funnel campaigns or the top of funnel creative accountable to consideration metrics like branded search activity, for example, and actually begin to measure, okay, this creative is creating intent for our brand in a way that is not. It's making our blended ROAS more efficient. And in the process, we're taking people who would have searched for generic keywords, now they're searching for branded keywords. That is a benefit of really persuasive creative. And then finally, I talked a bit about data deprecation or signal loss. So it's important to really scrutinize, how your creative ad tech vendor is resilient, not just to cookielessness, not just to unilateral actions from Apple, but more broadly, as walled gardens flourish, signals are dimming elsewhere, and yet there's tons of underpriced attention elsewhere that can be persuaded into market. So how's your vendor addressing that? How are they deploying AI in a way that's really unique? A lot of vendors are doing the same thing with AI, and in the process, the creative is looking similar as a result. And so it's getting lost in the sea of sameness in which you have AI generated creative that's relatively undifferentiated. And so I think it's important to ask critical questions about what data trains the model that your vendor is using, how they remove bias from the model, and how they're trying to stay a step ahead of technology that's evolving at warp speed. Let's get into the wave in the last couple minutes here before we transition to the open Q&A. So the Forrester Wave, it's an impartial evaluation of the leading vendors in this market, and there are two axes on which I scored the vendors. One was current offerings, and you can see all the current offerings listed here. It was production, personalization, intelligence, and then channel-specific capabilities. Strategy criteria, which are consistent across every wave, and I customized some of the definitions of these criteria for creative ad tech. And then the presence in the market, so how much money they make and how many customers they have. And as we go to the next slide, to get this output, I scored, as you can see on the y-axis of current offering, the x-axis of strategy, spoke to several customers for each of these vendors, some of whom are going to be in this Q&A section. And I put a lot of stock in the voice of the customer. I see my job as an analyst doing these sorts of waves as conveying the voice of the customer to the market so that you, when you're reading the wave, can get a sense, okay, this is peer-to-peer. This is my peer at, brand XYZ telling me what to buy. It's not Nikhil putting his thumb on the scale. It's not vendors who are paying to play. This is, a sort of impartial conveying of the voice of the customer back to other potential customers. And so Flashtalking did really well. They really earned the leader position, very strong current offering, very strong strategy, a significant market presence, and most of all, as we go to the next slide, proof is in what their customer said. So I excerpted some of the quotes that I got from the interviews. One is about the agnostic nature of Flashtalking. They're independent from media sales, unlike some other folks in the wave. And because of that agnosticism, they have a vast partner ecosystem. And they have qualitatively different relationships with those partners than others do, who are like reselling media. So that really came through. They are the joint between our creative and media agency. That's exactly what I'm talking about with the integration of creative media. That's literally what I'm talking about. They have a powerful ad server, and an MRC accredited ad server. Not every vendor in the wave had an ad server, but those who did, of those who did, Flashtalking has done the best job going from that central ad serving network across channels, across formats to solve for the fragmentation of audiences. And then they serve customers really well, as I'm sure the folks on this call can attest to. And that came up again and again in the references. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Aaron, and I appreciate you having me on and sharing some of the work that we're doing here at Forrester.
All right, thanks, Nikhil. That was awesome. And yes, we'll invite you to stay on here and participate in the discussion. Let's bring up our panel, and we can hear some of the leading marketers in the space are approaching many of the topics that Nikhil just covered, and of course using Flashtalking to help capitalize on them. So let's see, I see Megan and Carly. Jinx, if we can get you also to light up your camera. There he is. And great, so thank you all for being here. Why don't we start with some quick introductions, if each of you can just tell us who you are, share a little bit about your background, and then how long you've been working with Flashtalking. And Megan, you mind kicking us off?
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Holy, and I am a digital marketing and media manager at US Cellular, which is a wireless telecommunications company. I oversee our paid media programs, specifically all things digital, and we have been a long-standing partner of Flashtalking. We have been in partnership for about 13 years.
Love it. Thank you. Let's go to Jinx next.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jinx Chaglakar. I run acquisition marketing for Dish, which is satellite TV, and Sling TV, which is over-the-top live linear streaming. So I oversee all of our acquisition strategy, our offer strategy, our media, our e-commerce approach, our analytics. So everything kind of soup to nuts, from how you think about thinking about getting a customer and actually acquiring that customer. And I've been using Flashtalking for almost 10 years. We actually had Flashtalking when I was at Comcast and doing digital advertising there, and we brought you guys on. And luckily, when I moved to Sling and Dish, we're using you guys as well. So happy to be part of this conversation.
Amazing. Thank you. And Carly.
Hi, I'm Carly. I'm the Director of Digital Media here at Macy's, with a focus on display media advertising and activation. And we've been working with Flashtalking in display specifically for the last 6 years, and in the last 2 brought on online video as well. So working cross-channel.
Great, amazing, and definitely love the tenure here. The combined years between all of us here working with Flashtalking probably outnumbers some of the people working on our teams in just pure age. So that's great to see, and we love to evolve. And thank you for pushing us to continue to innovate in this space. So let's start kind of with an open-ended question. Just let's hear from each of you. What's the state of the play in paid media? You talked about different channels. Some of you cover different channels, some of you cover them all. So no need to share specifics, of course, just high level, but like, which channels are you seeing growing quickly, performing well? And let's do reverse order this time. Carly, you mind going first?
Sure. So Macy's, there are a couple things in play, I think, when it comes to addressable media strategy. There's media mix modeling and the impact on consumer sentiment and response to brands. and then cross-channel and omni-channel strategy with audience-first approach, which are integral to providing relevant, exciting, and personalized messaging. So when we think about which channels are important, we really look to those 3 areas to inform us, and we really have a POV that they all are. They resonate with the customer across their journey, different points in time. So we're growing where there's opportunity to enhance and engage in more interactive way across all of those channels. So that's a broad answer, but
No, that's great.
yeah.
And I promised we wouldn't stick to the script, and so here I am, not even all the way through the first question, taking us off. But you mentioned media mix modeling, and Nikhil, in your presentation, you talk about how creative is becoming a variable in that, right? So it's not just about the media channels, but creative's a variable that can inform, and of course, is differentiated. So Nikhil, if we can toss it back to you for a second, for marketers that are approaching media mix modeling, how do you think about, how can they think about creative in there alongside other variables, whether it be audience or channel?
Yeah, it's tricky to do. It's much easier said than done. But the goal is to decouple the impact of creative from the impact of audience and be able to isolate the extent to which creative is causing incremental responses that would not occur with less persuasive creative. You all can help with this. Agencies can help with this as well. But what you end up doing then is you're then able to, as I mentioned earlier, sort of select media placements based on what's going to be most conducive to your creative outperforming. It's a really sort of new and interesting way, I think, of thinking about media planning and media measurement, because for far too long, the impact of creative media have been entangled in a way it's been really hard to pull apart.
Yeah, and we'll get more into that, I think, too, with this discussion, kind of bridging the media creative gap, but then also thinking about the ways in which they can and should be isolated for things like analytics and optimization. So thank you for that. We'll come back to that. Jinx, back to our original question, just kind of general thoughts on state of play in media, which channels you're seeing growing and increasing investment.
Yeah, and I run 2 kind of different businesses, as I talked about before, which is satellite, which has a certain type of customer, and streaming, which has a different type of customer. And I think when you think about that, the channels that are working and the channels that we're growing in are the ones that are kind of cutting through the clutter, so to speak. And so it's interesting, like on the dish side, and we're all digital marketers here. My background is digital marketing. But I will tell you, direct mail works, and it definitely works because you're getting to somebody's mailbox where they literally have to look at you, right? And so, so in Dish, that's an example of where we're seeing success. And I talk to my team, and I know some of them are on the call because you can see on the participant list. I talk to them all the time about how we move from that and how we cut the clutter in digital and use those insights to drive that. On the streaming side, and what we see kind of globally is social is a big factor in cutting through the clutter as well. And that's why I think what Nikhil was talking about in the beginning about creative and it's not, and what you were just talking about, it's not just the media play, but it's also the creative play is really important. And how to use a parlance, you make the thumb stop right in the scroll with your creative, and how you can optimize that is really key for how we're thinking about it. But those are just 2 examples of what we see around being relevant to the customer where they are and sort of cutting through that.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll come back in this discussion too. Be keen to get your take, Jinx, on how you organize your teams around that and in thinking through the different opportunities by channel, but also making sure that the insights get shared sort of across. So let's put a pin in that one for now. And Megan, let's get your just kind of general thoughts, state of play, paid media, channels, et cetera.
Sure, yeah. Obviously, it's an industry that rapidly evolves. And speaking on behalf of US Cellular, I would agree with Jinx in that the social field, advertisers, us included, are really steadily increasing our investment to just keep pace with that growing consumer demand and just the massive amount of time that people are spending on these platforms. In particular, we're focusing on short form video content across, TikTok, Instagram Reels specifically, YouTube Shorts, etc. I would add one more channel that I think is beating expectations for us is the CTV space. I think, streaming platforms and publishers are really starting to raise the bar in terms of their offerings and what they're, giving advertisers in terms of ad-supported options. And then simultaneously, I think they're also kind of increasing and improving the ad experience for their viewers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's come back to CTV and streaming too, because there's some stuff we want to unpack there. But social's been mentioned a couple times, so I want to do a follow-up on that from a Flashtalking perspective. We've also invested a lot in social. I personally came from 4C, which was acquired by MediaOcean and then merged in with Flashtalking. So now we do have that kind of full ability between the walled gardens and the open web. And so maybe to Nikhil, let me throw this one to you. You mentioned, that the open internet remains very important. You also need to be able to operate within closed ecosystems. And so maybe from the lens of data deprecation and thinking through what signals are available, when you're operating out on the open web versus logged in walled garden environments, what impact is data deprecation having? And generally, how do you think about what that means for the role of creative?
Yeah, it's a great question. So across the open internet, what's basically happened is that we as marketers have lost visibility into clues of intent that we used to act on. So when I speak to clients about this, I analogize it to having the equivalent of the last 5 credit card purchases from a customer. If you have their last 5 purchases, you can more reasonably assume what they're going to buy next than if you didn't. Now we don't have those purchases. So you're guessing, are they in market for this? Are they in market for that? The only way to actually create intent for what you're selling is to have persuasive creative bring them into market for your products and services. So it's a lot more important across that. And then with the walled gardens, I think there's a tendency actually I'm seeing to get lazy. The signals are so strong in walled gardens. I can put anything in front of someone if I know what they're going to buy next because I have all this visibility into them. Creative is less important there than audience targeting. That's not true. Creative should work just as hard if you're retargeting a past purchaser within the Amazon ecosystem than it would if you're trying to create intent for someone who's just browsing the news. So that's how I see that market right now.
Well, Carly, operating across some of the channels that are experiencing this impact of data deprecation, what has that kind of meant for you and your approach to media and creative for that matter?
Yeah, so the buzzword of personalization and exactly what Nikhil is saying, your creative needs to be persuasive and it needs to be relevant to the consumer. Where you're working at Macy's, a national retailer, we know a lot about our customers. So from a first party perspective, you have signals that can tell you what the customer is doing with Macy's, but brand loyalty is really deprecating, right? So what are they doing at competitors? What are they doing offsite? And having those signals are what will help us fuel the creative iterations that creative ad tech's helping us build. So we have both internal road mapping for how we get to an identity framework that's going to keep the fidelity of what we know about the customer and how to produce. And then, we work with partners like Flashtalking. We look for integrations to help enrich our data so that we could get ahead of it and maintain movement in the creatives that we serve. The storytelling that is integral to moments that matter. Macy's surrounds the customer in different ways, throughout the season. So we have to make sure that we're there when they expect us to be.
Great call out. Yeah, moments that matter. Love that. And a lot of the investment from Flashtalking goes to what are those kind of real-time signals that we can activate against the triggers, if you will, to make sure that we're kind of meeting the consumer where they are, matched with, in your case, a very robust first-party data. Jinx, maybe let's come back to you with and along that question we started to tee up around how you think about structuring teams and processes and using technology to bridge the gap between creative and media?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to set the high level, I think I echo everyone when I say what I say to my team all the time is, you can have the greatest creative in the world, but if it's got crappy media and a crappy sales experience that's underlying it, it's bad advertising. We have the greatest media in the world, crappy creative, crappy digital experience, it's crappy advertising. It goes down, right? You need to have this full view, and you can't look at it like there's one team that's making creative and handing it off. It's not a waterfall process, right? It's an iterative process. So what we've tried to develop basically on our team, again, we're a work in progress like everyone, is how do we integrate those teams in the upfront of what we're trying to do. So we'll develop a strategy, and then we'll put it to our creative and media teams to help us execute that strategy, and we'll work that together, right? And those teams that are set up are really set up in a way to have that push and pull versus, again, the waterfall approach of hey, we have this brilliant creative idea and let's make it work everywhere. And so what's key to technology in that is that can become really costly, right? Because if I want to hit, I'm in the TV space, right? So if I want to hit Aaron because we believe he's a really great customer and he likes news and he likes reality TV, Nikhil, on the other hand, likes basketball, right? I want to make sure I hit you guys with the relevant creative, with the relevant imagery, with the relevant offer at the relevant moment, right? And if I'm going to go back to my creative teams and say, build that, then that's when it starts to become untenable, right? Or if I'm going to tell my analytics team to put every permutation of a propensity model to do that, becomes untenable. So technology really, in my view, it allows us to bridge that gap from strategy and what we believe is the right creative, and then stratify that, for lack of a better word, across our segments to hit that personalization that Carly was talking about a minute ago.
Yeah. And so maybe just to build on that for a sec, again, further taking us off script, but I know you're cool freestyling with me here, Jinx. So I feel seen, reality TV got me nailed. How do you think about when you talk about personalization and being relevant, going up to that line without crossing over into being kind of creepy, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I wish I had the answer to that. I think in one respect, it could be a good problem to have because that means we know that much about you that we actually have to pull back to all that was brought up. But I think it's what we do is try to think about it. Well, how do we hit the generic kind of things that feel relevant versus feel intrusive, right? Like basketball seems relevant, right? Oh, I'm there, whereas something else, how you voted if in the news thing might feel creepy, right? Or something like that. So the other thing that we have to consider, which hopefully most of you don't, is we have IP considerations, right? Like we have, I'll use the basketball example, right? I can't just put our stuff into an AI and all of a sudden it builds an image of LeBron, right? And then I'm using my creative. That's great. It might help conversion, but I guarantee you I'm going to get a call from a lawyer the next day, right? So the things we have to consider is not only the creepy factor, but the IP factor and what Nikhil was talking about around some of that risk. That's where we have to figure out the right governance and the way for us to check this, because in my nirvana state, I don't want any human to touch it. I want to hit everyone with individualized creative that's highly personalized, highly targeted. Reality that blocks that nirvana state is, do we actually have the right controls to make sure we're not infringing on IP, infringing on creepiness, for lack of a better term, et cetera.
Totally. And one of the ways we're seeing a lot of people solve for that and also using Flashtalking is in mapping the taxonomies, right? So to your example, like basketball, as in a hierarchy, okay, there's that's a pretty it's pretty high up on the rung versus getting very down to specifics. And so when you're operating at that level, whether it's through if you're doing contextual targeting on your ads, et cetera, mapping that in and bringing in creative that's at that level is still relevant without being creepy, as opposed to going all the way down to the 11th rung on the ladder. Maybe in like a Carly, in your case, you may have the data down there and know exactly what they just bought, but choose to only operate. Maybe it's at the level of children's products and not down to like a level of specificity that might freak somebody out. So definitely something to consider, and that's where contextual and taxonomies come into play. Megan, let's kick it to you. So we've been talking about kind of role of creative, connecting teams, processes. Let's just kind of hear general thoughts from you on how you're approaching it, and whether it's kind of the gap between creative and media. How do you all operate to make sure that things are harmonious?
Sure, yeah, I think, Nikhil mentioned this earlier in his presentation that organizations are witnessing media and creative really converging. And I think that starts from the ideation and the insights phase all the way through that trafficking and optimization. Within US Cellular, I think we're really trying to break down some of those previous traditional silos. One thing being more of an integrated briefing process. I think, too oftentimes creative teams are briefed after decisions are made by the media team, and their creative is a little bit more reactive instead of collaborative. And I think one thing also that we're working on is just really understanding the benchmarks that our performance teams are measuring it against, and how that parallels in path with what our creative teams are measuring against, and coming together and really trying to unify our goals and our KPIs, because creative and media really does impact each other. I would say, switching gears a little bit to like processes and technologies, I think on the media side of the house, so much time is spent on, your bids and your budgets and the targeting that you're purchasing. For US Cellular, it's really important to kind of counterbalance that and interact more with how do we utilize creative to make media better. For example, one thing that we're really focused on is more automating traffic and how do we simplify that entire process between creative and media. For example, we rely on Flashtalking's creative automation and trafficking support tool. I think that really helps bridge the gap between creative and media, with asset production and delivery and optimizations and measurement as well.
And thank you. Appreciate the plug too. Our favorite acronym around here, CATS. So we love our CATS.
I like the acronym a lot better. It's way easier than saying that full name out loud.
Yeah, but I appreciate you doing it because only the insiders know what CATS is. So now everybody knows. Carly, back to you for a second on let's go a little deeper on technology and how you think about operating a tech stack to deliver some of that creative messaging, and just what are some of the innovations you're seeing in and around ad tech?
Yeah, some of the innovations I'm seeing for ad tech, or that we're even utilizing here at Macy's, is utilizing, may sound simple, but programmatic advertising extending into channels that we're not traditionally using it. So that's where online video, we're able to tap into DCO with Flashtalking and really innovate the experience there to break through some of the clutter and those kinds of placements. We're also working with our agency on a global and local creative taxonomy to help streamline and identify what creative elements are important to us and labeling them. So coupled with Flashtalking creative labeling, what are Macy's standards and what do we believe is resonating with the customer, and then getting that feedback loop in place, right? So, to Nikhil's point before, you want to understand kind of separately how creative is working, and then, but also how that impacts the audience and the audience performance. And so I would say those are two areas right now that are really integral to my channel, but also understanding how we learn, how we get to the measurement and the analytics that sort of leads into bridging the gap between creative and media, and where they also sit together.
Let's probe a bit deeper there, and Nikhil, maybe toss this one to you. You mentioned earlier, like the example of a client, I think it was an apparel client who, realized that, I forget, was it a certain like breed of dog or a chew toy or something, getting to that level of specificity was performing best along with background colors and other elements of the ad. Carly was talking about using labels and kind of how Flashtalking automates that process. So you can see the different elements of the ad. So that way, when you're running reports or doing your analytics, you can see those variables and then figure out the optimal combination. From when you look at the market, when you look at technology platforms, you mentioned kind of the end-to-end workflow. Talk a little bit about like the insights and intelligence aspect that I think a lot of people maybe take for granted or overlook. They're just so focused on whether it's elements of creative production or the media activation. Talk a little bit about the insights and intelligence and why that's super important to have as part of this.
Yeah, well, it's incredibly important because the data that you get from creative is resilient to deprecation. Like that is data that you're getting consensually from your audience as they respond to variations. So it's a database that gets richer and richer the more tests you run. And in the process, you really understand your customers and you understand what concepts they have in mind, what words they use when they try to solve the problems they have, what colors they like, what chew toys they prefer, things like that. Yeah, I was working with a big beverage brand who's testing something as simple as a can versus a bottle, and it's making a huge difference in performance, night versus day. Working with someone else who was ramping up their holiday creative last week, and they were saying, should our text treatment be snowy or should it not? How much snow do we really need in the ad, depending on where we are in the country? And so those questions seem somewhat trivial, but they're incredibly important. And in some cases, they're saving millions of dollars for the brand who makes the right decision based on the answer to that question. And so when you have this database with all that intel, it really ends up being a trove of voice of customer that you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, and that's probably a good segue to everyone's favorite topic right now, which is AI. Specifically to what we were just talking about with insights and intelligence. A big focus for Flashtalking is around how we can use it not only for the obvious use cases, like developing creative. We've talked about some of the kind of opportunities, but also risks there, but also in terms of analyzing data and insights. And so we acquired a company called Drism AI, which helps with some of the auto classification and labeling of items and ads for that taxonomy we're talking about. We're also using generative AI now to be able to spit out insights, so to assess what's happening and use in normal human language, what we're seeing, what's working, and where some opportunities are. Maybe Jinx, let's start with you, and we can keep it broad, just on the topic of AI, Gen AI. How's it making an impact? How are you and your teams using it today, and where do we expect to be maybe a few years down the line?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I'm in a dual conversation. I'm in conversation with our executives, et cetera, that are like, how are we using AI? It's the buzzword. We need to use it. And then the team that's saying, I read all these articles about AI. We're not cool enough. We're not using it. And I have to be like, guys, we're using it every day. Like whether you know it or not, like you're absolutely using it every day, whether it's on our media bids, whether it's, on the way we're doing analytics. So, but tangibly, like when, to bring it to life, like the way we use AI is really, how do we develop propensity models, right? Like what are we looking at from our customers? How are we using that first party data, ingesting third party data and starting to develop models, right? That's something we've done with AI. I'd say we're not in the Gen AI space yet, where we're still creating those models and defining them. My Nirvana state on that is Gen AI tells us the model, it creates it, and it's like, great. Then we can go all and go to lunch, right? We'll see how that happens. But so that's what we're doing on the modeling analytics perspective. And then of course you talked about it. Like we are doing Gen AI creative. I mean, it's a manual process in the sense that we create it, we review it. It's a very similar path, right, to what you have with standard, but it certainly reduces the speed to market and increases the speed to market, reduces the time to market. And so like that, we do it out of the gate. And what we're now starting to do, which is the last piece, is enabling the end user to actually start to query analytics tools to then say like, hey, which is the creative that worked the best? How do I better optimize this creative, right? Which is more Gen AI analytics reporting, I would say. It's like less around the propensity model I talked about up front, but more about how do we learn from this? How do we understand this? And we use that with tools on our website, but we're also starting to investigate that and other things. So that's the way we're using it. Again, I would say probably 70% on AI, probably like a 40% on Gen AI, based on how we move it past creative, if that helps.
Yeah. So if we're crawl, walk, run, fly, we're somewhere right in the middle there. So
that's right.
Yeah, cool. Megan, how about you? How are you thinking about AI? How's it making an impact within your organization? How are you thinking about opportunities for the future?
Yeah, I definitely agree, Jinx, with your call outs. I think everyone loves that buzzword. How do we do it? How do we step into it? To your point, we're all using it, whether we realize it or not. All of our partners, all of our platforms, from a media buying perspective, we use it with our DSP. We always keep that human insight of knowing our brand in the hands on the keyboards. But a lot of features, we're letting AI make those decisions and predictions about our bids and our budgets. Switching gears to more of like the creative realm, one thing we're really excited about is US Cellular is kind of starting to dip their toes into more impression level creative optimization. So, getting down to that granularity of making decisions with AI at that impression level. So, using model signals such as, segment, time of day, device, and making more generative tweaks to bring in different themes, different layouts, different messaging or CTAs. So very new to this space there, but we're really excited to take away some learnings from that.
Yeah, and we're seeing great adoption there across customers. Again, it's the crawl, walk, run, fly, right? And so for some, it's just creating variations or resizing, right? And using the AI to do some of that off of already approved assets. So you can kind of stay, away from potential brand or IP risks. Whereas others, are able to, or go all in on just generative from scratch with some guardrails, of course, and manual reviews still remain very important. So kind of enabling that across the spectrum becomes important as people get more comfortable. And yeah, we're just seeing that space accelerate big time. Carly, any thoughts from you on the AI topic?
Yeah, largely aligned, using it in the same ways, largely in a creative enablement capacity, and then also audience building, audience propensity, but also audience prospecting. So what are we using about intent and predictive modeling to help us acquire and build the customer funnel? That's where we're largely sitting. I would say there are other areas outside of ad tech that Macy's is actually adopting AI. I would say supply chain, going a little off topic, supply chain is one area. So I think there's probably movement that's happening internally of how we adopt it and transfer, with guidelines and ethics, of course, for applying more nuanced ways for marketing in specific.
Yeah, great. All right, so we're getting close on time here. Why don't we make this our last question, and let's hear from each of you. And we can start with, let's go back to Jinx, and then we'll go Megan, Carly, and Nikhil. You can have the final word. So thinking ahead down the line, let's call it like a 1-year horizon. What other trends are you keeping an eye on? If we're all here at the same time, looking at, well, Nikhil, I don't think you're doing another wave within the next year, but if we were, and we're talking about the category, how the category's evolved, how teams, processes, tools have evolved, what trends do you think are going to be germane? What are you focused on? And Jinx, let's kick it to you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And, for me, it is really what I keep calling the nirvana state, which is, today, and we've been using Flashtalking for a long time, we've got a static set of creatives that we've been getting better at serving dynamically to audiences, right? Like, I'm really excited about the possibility of getting as close to the nirvana state I talked about, which is, I don't want to give you static creatives that Flashtalking then serves to an audience because it's just a container in the ad space. Like, I want to give you some brand guidelines. I want to give you what I believe the interests are, and then I want and what the offer palette is, and then I want you to build or the service to build what that right creative that's going to move the needle for that customer to break through the clutter. Like, I don't want to have to go and test 5 different variations of dog chew toy color to figure out that blue is the best, only to find out tomorrow that actually it wasn't, because now the market's changed, right? We have to be that dynamic. The space is that dynamic. Media is that dynamic. Unfortunately or fortunately, our attention spans are that dynamic now, or it's small. So we need to do that. And I think for me, that's what really excites me. And what I try to keep the team focused on is, how do we build the right team structure and team processes? So love the idea of the unified brief and bringing the team together is what I said around doing that. And then we need to then figure out the right guardrails to make sure we can actually serve to mitigate some of the risks that we were talking about. So that's how Flashtalking can help us. So that's my pitch to you as well.
Ask it, ask and you shall receive. Megan, over to you.
Yeah, Jinx, you mentioned attention span, which I think is relevant of what a trend we're keeping an eye on, is just the exploration of non-traditional like measurement opportunities, specifically like attention metrics in the space. A lot of verification solutions are looking to evaluate more of a deeper sense of a user's engagement. Not only was it just served, but like what kind of quality and content and true engagement did a user interact with when an ad is served?
Yeah, that's a big one for us. We're definitely paying attention, but on that front. Protected by Mediation is our verification service, and a lot of what we're focused on is kind of flipping the model from a negative model that's based on like exclusions and blocking to more of a proactive model that takes into account the KPI, whether it's attention or otherwise, and focuses on more a holistic view on where you can achieve those. So check on that one. And Carly, over to you.
Yeah, similarly, Megan and Jinx, with attention top of mind, attention analytics and how AI plays a role and how that influences the creative ad tech that we're enabling and all the creative variation that exists. How are we now bridging the gap between creative attention and the audience? I also think as we move into audience AI 2.0, this road mapping or more guidelines, coming from IAB and also internally brand road mapping. What are the ethics? What are the use cases? What are the level of efforts? How do we streamline it? And how do we also just plug in for sustainability and environmental impact? How are we thinking about that as a lift for brands to utilize the technology and partners alike?
Yeah, spot on. All right, Nikhil, you've got the final word, but leave me 2 minutes so I can give everybody their links for their downloads.
Of
So
course.
what are you focused on and thinking about for the next year?
Yeah, I mean, real quick, what I haven't mentioned yet is consumers co-creating creative. I'm excited about that. So I think with Gen AI, we can now actually break the fourth wall between brands and consumers. Burger King had this $1 million Whopper contest in which folks were submitting text prompts for burger toppings that was then generated into an image. And in that case, the consumer is literally creating the creative. Intuit has these AI generated aura readings in which the consumer is also creating the ad experience. And so I'm excited about that. I think that that's really going to change the shape of the funnel. I think it's also going to change how creative looks and feels. So I'm keeping my eye on that.
Cool. All right, amazing. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Great discussion. So much more to unpack, and we'll look forward to hopefully doing this again together in the future. As promised, I have some parting gifts for everyone. The first of which is a direct access to the report that Nikhil recently published and covered here today. So we'll drop a link in the chat. You can also hit that QR code to get it for yourself. For those who are Forrester clients, you can also go into their platform and access it, and you can change some of the weighting on the criteria and stuff. So say if it's more important for you to have the top platform for ad serving, you can change the weight applied there, and sure, the Flashtalking will jump up a few centimeters on the graphic there, just saying. And yeah, so please take advantage of the access to this. It's complimentary. And next up, we have a couple of lovely playbooks. So one is for retail, one's for auto. They both get into how you can amplify your campaign performance with paid social. We talk a lot about social as a growing and important channel. So grab these codes. We'll put the links in the chat as well. And last but not least, we want to get your input for our next report. So we are in market now fielding a survey for our 2025 Outlook report. Last time we did this, I think we had over 1,200 marketers who responded. So it's become a highly anticipated body of work. And so we want to make sure your voice is heard as part of that. So hit the code, take the survey. Should be no more than maybe 5-10 minutes. Help us assess some of the key trends that we've discussed today and anything else that's on your mind. And then, of course, we'll share it out probably early January timeframe once we've compiled the report. And you can use that to kind of benchmark your team or brand against the industry. So with that, I'll say thanks again to our panelists, to our guest speaker, and we look forward to having you for a future webinar, whether it's in focus with Flashtalking. We also have our Mediation Current series, and both will be back in 2025. So hope to see you then. Thanks a lot.